An elderly man found the body of a canine German Shepherd. When he got closer, something heartbreaking happened. Harold had walked this trail behind his property hundreds of times before. The towering pines, the cool Oregon air, the soft crunch of dirt beneath his boots. It was his routine, a simple escape from the quiet emptiness of retirement and the grief that still lingered after losing his wife. But that morning, something on the side of the path stopped him cold. Lying motionless in the tall grass was a German Shepherd. Its fur, once thick and glossy, now matted and dirty. The unmistakable canine police vest on its body was faded and torn. Harold's heart ached as he knelt beside the dog, fearing the worst. But just as he reached out, ready to say a quiet goodbye, the dog's chest rose, barely. A shallow, struggling breath. In that instant, Harold knew he couldn't walk away. What followed was a race against time, a test of trust and a bond that neither man nor dog ever expected. Before we dive into this emotional and inspiring story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us share more incredible true stories about loyalty, hope, and second chances. The morning air carried a chill that Harold hadn't felt in years. As he walked the narrow dirt path behind his small property in rural Oregon, he pulled his flannel jacket tighter around him. The tall pines swayed gently above, casting long shadows on the trail below. For Harold, these walks were more than exercise. They were therapy. Since his wife, Margaret, passed 2 years ago, the silence inside his house had become unbearable. Out here, with birds chirping and leaves rustling, he could breathe again. But this morning, something disrupted that peace. Up ahead, near the bend where the blackberry bushes grew wild, Harold noticed a dark shape lying near the edge of the path. From a distance, it looked like a fallen log, but something felt off. The shape was too defined, too still. Curiosity turned to concern, and as he stepped closer, that's when he saw the fur, black and tan, thick but tangled with dirt and leaves. His stomach twisted. "A dog?" he muttered under his breath, but as he got even closer, his heart dropped. The dog wore a vest. Not just any vest. This was a canine unit vest. Faded letters still visible on the side. Police, Canine. Harold froze. His years as a firefighter had taught him to recognize a scene of tragedy from a mile away. He had seen officers cry over fallen canine partners. He had seen dogs pulled from rubble after natural disasters. But this felt personal. He knelt beside the German Shepherd, placing a trembling hand near its neck, searching for a pulse. For several agonizing seconds, he felt nothing. No rise of the chest, no flicker of movement. But just as he was about to pull his hand away, there it was, a shallow breath. So faint, he almost missed it. "Hang in there, buddy," Harold whispered, panic rising in his throat. His mind raced. There wasn't a vet nearby. The nearest clinic was at least a 30-minute drive, and that was if traffic was light. Without hesitation, Harold slipped his arms beneath the dog's frail body. The shepherd was heavier than it looked, muscles limp but still dense with weight. As he carried the dog back toward his house, memories of rescue missions from decades ago flooded his mind. The rush of adrenaline, the fears of losing someone, the stubborn refusal to give up. "This isn't your time," he murmured, as if the dog could hear him. "You're gonna fight, just like I did." By the time Harold reached his porch, he was out of breath. He laid the dog gently on an old quilt just inside the front door and grabbed his phone with shaking hands. "Hi, this is Harold Miller," he told the emergency veterinary clinic. "I found a canine shepherd. He's barely breathing. I'm bringing him in now." The receptionist on the other end was calm but direct. "We'll be ready. Drive safe." Minutes later, Harold wrapped the dog in a blanket, placed him carefully in the back seat of his pickup truck, and sped down the road faster than he'd driven in years. Every red light felt like an enemy. Every turn, a race against time. As the tires screeched into the vet clinic parking lot, staff members rushed out with a stretcher. They worked quickly, checking vitals and starting oxygen as they wheeled the shepherd inside. Harold stood at the entrance, watching helplessly as the doors swung shut behind them. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at the empty space where the dog had been. Then he did something he hadn't done in months. He prayed, not for himself, not for Margaret, but for a dog he'd just met, and already couldn't imagine losing. Harold sat in the cold plastic chair of the veterinary clinic's waiting room, staring at the ticking clock on the wall. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the faint odor of wet fur lingered in the air. His hands, still shaking from the adrenaline, clutched his worn baseball cap, twisting it over and over. Minutes felt like hours every time the swinging doors creaked open. Harold's heart jumped, but it was never the doctor. Just other pet owners with dogs on leashes, cats in carriers, and worried faces that mirrored his own. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a young woman in scrubs appeared. Her name tag read Dr. Perez. Her eyes were kind, but the tightness in her expression made Harold's stomach knot. "How is he?" Harold asked, standing quickly. Dr. Perez exhaled slowly. "He's critical. Severe dehydration, malnourishment, multiple lacerations, and at least 2 broken ribs. We've stabilized his breathing for now, but..." She paused, biting her lip. "He's not out of danger." Harold swallowed hard. "But he's fighting, right?" Dr. Perez nodded. "He is. He's tough. Typical for a canine. But he's been through a lot." Harold hesitated before asking the next question. "Do you know how long he's been out there?" Dr. Perez shook her head. "At least a couple of days, maybe more. Given the state of his injuries, I'd guess he's been on his own for a while." The weight of her words settled heavy on Harold's shoulders. "Can I see him?" he asked softly. "Just for a minute," she said. "But keep it quiet and don't touch him too much. He's in a fragile state." Harold followed her down the hall into the treatment room. The sight before him nearly broke him. The dog lay stretched out on a stainless steel table, hooked up to IV lines and an oxygen mask. His fur was shaved in patches where wounds had been cleaned and treated. Bandages wrapped around his ribs, and fresh stitches ran along one leg. But it was the shepherd's face that hit Harold the hardest. Eyes half open, glazed with exhaustion and pain, but still aware. Harold stepped closer, kneeling beside the table so they were eye level. "Hey there, buddy," he whispered, voice trembling. "You're safe now. I got you." For a brief second, the dog's tail twitched. Barely noticeable, but enough to make Harold's throat tighten. Dr. Perez stood behind him. "He's responding to your voice." Harold blinked away the tears that threatened to fall. "I just found him this morning, but I'm not going anywhere now." Back in the waiting room, Harold called Omar, the local sheriff and an old friend from his firefighting days. Within an hour, Omar arrived, looking both surprised and concerned. "You're telling me you found a canine dog lying out by your trail?" Omar asked, flipping through the photos Harold had taken of the scene. "Yeah," Harold confirmed. "And he's wearing a vest. Police issue." Omar scratched his beard. "That's strange. We don't have any missing canines reported in the area. I'll check with state agencies and surrounding counties, but something doesn't add up." Harold's mind raced with possibilities. Was the dog abandoned? Injured during a mission? Or worse, was there someone out there still looking for him? Later that evening, as Harold sat by the clinic window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Dr. Perez approached again. "We need to talk about payment," she said gently. The treatments, the meds. This is going to get expensive. Harold nodded, already expecting this conversation. Put it on my tab, whatever it takes. She gave him a soft smile. You're a good man. Harold looked back through the glass window at the shepherd, who now slept under a heated blanket, his breathing still shallow but steady. I'm just doing what anyone should, Harold said. But deep inside, he knew that wasn't true. Most people wouldn't have stopped on that trail. Most would have looked the other way. But Harold couldn't, not after everything life had already taken from him. And now, he wouldn't let this dog be another thing lost to the world. The next morning, Harold was back at the clinic before sunrise. The staff hadn't even turned on the waiting room lights yet, but he didn't care. He sat in the same hard chair, sipping bitter coffee from a vending machine and waiting for any update on the dog's condition. Dr. Perez appeared around 6 a.m., her face weary but smiling faintly. He made it through the night, she said, folding her arms across her chest. That's more than we expected. His vitals are improving, slowly, but improving. Relief washed over Harold like a wave. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Can I sit with him? He asked. Dr. Perez nodded. Just for a little while. The more he hears your voice, the better. Walking into the treatment room, Harold saw the German Shepherd curled up on a padded mat now, no longer on the cold steel table. His oxygen mask had been removed for short periods, and the IV still dripped steadily beside him. Harold knelt down, stroking the dog's head gently. The shepherd's eyes opened just slightly at the familiar voice. You're a fighter, aren't you? Harold whispered. The dog's ears flickered weakly in response. For the next hour, Harold sat there telling the shepherd stories. About Margaret, about the firehouse back in the day, about the time he rescued 3 kittens from under a collapsed porch. He didn't even know if the dog understood, but talking helped fill the silence, and somehow it felt right. Later that afternoon, Omar returned with news. I checked with all the police departments in a 200-mile radius, he said, flipping through a small notebook. No one's missing a canine. No deployments in this area recently. It's like he doesn't exist. Harold frowned. How's that possible? Dogs like him, they don't all just show up out of nowhere. Omar shrugged. Only 2 possibilities. Either he was privately owned and someone dumped him, or he came from a unit that doesn't want to report him missing. Harold felt a chill crawl down his spine. You mean military? Omar nodded slowly. Could be. Harold's gaze shifted back to the dog. There was something in his eyes. Something haunted, like he'd seen too much in too little time. That evening, as Harold sat beside him again, he realized he couldn't keep calling him boy or buddy. You need a name, Harold said softly. For a moment, he thought hard. Then it came to him. Simple but strong. Shadow, he whispered. Yeah, that fits. You've been running in the shadows for too long. At the sound of the word, the dog's tail gave the slightest twitch. Enough to make Harold smile for the first time in days. From that moment on, Shadow it was. The following day brought small signs of hope. Shadow managed to lift his head and drink a little water from a bowl. Dr. Perez seemed cautiously optimistic. She mentioned that, if he kept improving, he could be moved out of intensive care within a week. But as always, good moments never lasted long. Just after sunset, as Harold was gathering his jacket to leave for the night, one of the clinic staff rushed into the waiting room. Mr. Miller, you need to come quick. Harold's heart stopped. Racing down the hall, he pushed open the treatment room door to find 2 techs struggling to stabilize Shadow. The monitors beeped erratically. His breathing, which had just started to stabilize, now came in shallow, uneven gasps. What's happening? Harold shouted. His lungs, they're filling with fluid, Dr. Perez said, her hands moving fast, inserting a new line and shouting orders to her team. "We're losing him!" Harold stood frozen in the corner, helpless, watching as the tut he'd just named, the dog he'd just started to hope for, slipped closer to the edge again. Tears stung his eyes. "Come on, Shadow," he whispered under his breath, fists clenched. "Don't give up on me now." And deep inside, Harold knew this fight was far from over, but he also knew he wasn't going to let Shadow face it alone. The clinic hallways were a blur of movement and noise. Alarms blaring, nurses shouting, machines flashing red. Harold stood pressed against the far wall, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst through his chest. Shadow lay limp on the table again, surrounded by Dr. Perez and her team. Tubes, wires, oxygen lines, all of it wrapped around the German Shepherd's fragile, battered body. "Get the crash cart!" someone yelled. Harold's knees nearly buckled. He wanted to run into the room, to yell at Shadow to fight, to scream at the universe to stop taking things away from him. First Margaret. Now this act that he'd only known for days but somehow felt responsible for, connected to. Through the glass, he watched as Dr. Perez placed paddles against Shadow's chest. "Clear!" The room filled with a jolt of energy. Shadow's body convulsed slightly, then settled again. Too still. Harold turned away, covering his face with trembling hands. Memories flooded back, those awful nights in the firehouse when they lost people, the helplessness, the guilt. But then, through the blur of his tears, a sound, a long, slow beep turning into a steady rhythm. Harold whipped around to see the heart monitor showing a weak but stable pulse. Shadow's chest rose slightly. Then again, he was breathing. Not well, not strong, but breathing. Dr. Perez exhaled sharply, dropping her shoulders in relief. "He's back," she said softly to her team. Harold rushed into the room as soon as they allowed it, kneeling by Shadow's side. "Good boy. You're not done yet," he whispered, stroking the dog's ear gently. The room slowly cleared out as the immediate danger passed. Only Harold and Dr. Perez remained. "I won't lie to you," she said, her voice low and honest. "That was too close. He's got a long road ahead. But some dogs, they're different. They hold on for reasons we don't always understand." Harold swallowed hard. "Yeah, I think I get that." For the next few hours, Harold sat at Shadow's side, refusing to leave even for food or coffee. By early morning, something unexpected happened. As Harold dozed off in the chair, chin resting on his chest, he felt something cold press against his fingers. Opening his eyes, he saw Shadow, barely awake, lifting his head just enough to nudge Harold's hand with his nose. Harold's throat tightened. "Hey, look at you," he whispered, smiling for the first time in days. Shadow's eyes stayed on him, half-lidded but aware. That simple gesture, weak as it was, felt like a victory bigger than any Harold had experienced in years. Later that morning, Omar returned with more news. "We traced the serial number on the K9 vest," he said, holding up a printout. "It belonged to a police unit, but here's the catch. The dog wasn't listed as active duty for over a year. Turns out, he went missing during a training exercise upstate over 14 months ago. Declared deceased. They never recovered the body." Harold's eyes widened. "You're telling me he survived on his own for over a year?" "Looks that way," Omar said. "Through forests, storms, who knows what else. And somehow, he ended up here." Harold glanced at Shadow, now sleeping peacefully, chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. "Unbelievable," Harold murmured. But deep down, it wasn't just unbelievable. It was a miracle. That night, as Harold sat by Shadow's side, He knew that whatever came next, more vet bills, long recovery days, months of therapy, it didn't matter. Because from this point on, they were in this together. A week passed, and every day, Shadow grew a little stronger. His breathing stabilized. The color returned to his gums. He even managed to stand on shaky legs for a few seconds with the help of 2 vet techs. Harold became a permanent fixture at the clinic. The staff smiled whenever he walked through the door with his usual cup of black coffee and a bag of treats he insisted on buying, even though Shadow could barely eat. During those quiet hours sitting by Shadow's side, Harold found himself talking more and more to the dog. He told Shadow about Margaret, about the years they'd spent in the small house on Willow Creek Road, about the garden she loved and how empty the place felt now. "You've filled more silence in 1 week than I've felt in 2 years," Harold said one afternoon, stroking Shadow's neck. Shadow's ears flicked, and for the first time, he let out a soft, low whine, as if acknowledging every word. But just when Harold started to believe things were finally turning around, Omar called. Harold stepped outside the clinic, holding his phone tightly to his ear. "Hey, it's me," Omar said. His tone was serious. Too serious. "What's going on?" Harold asked, his gut twisting. "I've been digging deeper into Shadow's background. I pulled some strings with an old buddy at the state police. Turns out, there's more to this dog than we thought." Harold's heart skipped. "More? What do you mean?" There was a confidential file attached to Shadow's service record. Red flagged. High-level clearance only. Apparently, during his last mission, Shadow was part of an undercover K9 narcotics task force. There was a drug bust gone wrong. 2 officers were injured. Shadow disappeared during the chaos. Harold leaned against the wall trying to process. "But that was over a year ago." "Yeah," Omar continued. "And here's the real kicker. The drug cartel involved? They've been looking for him ever since." Harold felt the blood drain from his face. "You're telling me people could still be after him?" "Yes," Omar said bluntly. "And the fact that he's alive, it's a loose end they probably never expected." Harold's mind raced. He looked back through the clinic window at Shadow, who was now resting peacefully, unaware of the danger still lurking out there. "So what do I do?" Harold asked quietly. Omar sighed. "For now, keep it quiet. I'm pulling some favors to get him officially off the radar. No public records, no social media, nothing." "But you need to understand something, Harold. Keeping him safe might not be easy." Harold hung up and stood there for a long minute, staring at the gravel parking lot, fists clenched at his sides. After everything Shadow had survived, after fighting death itself in that clinic room, now they had a new threat. But Harold didn't hesitate. Walking back inside, he sat down beside Shadow, placing a firm hand on the dog's back. "Looks like you're not the only stubborn one around here," he whispered. Shadow opened one eye as if understanding. Harold smiled grimly. "Let them come. They'll have to go through me first." And with that silent promise, a new chapter in both their lives began, one filled with danger, but also hope, loyalty, and a bond no one could break. The days that followed felt like a countdown. Harold couldn't see, but felt deep in his bones. Every knock on the door, every unknown car slowing down near his driveway, it all sent a wave of tension through him. Shadow, now strong enough to walk without help, stayed close to Harold's side at all times. The German Shepherd's eyes, once glassy and unfocused, now burned with awareness. There was a sharpness to him, a readiness that Harold hadn't seen in any dog before. At night, Shadow lay near the front door, ears twitching at every creak of the floorboards or rustle of the wind outside. It was like he knew danger wasn't far behind. One evening, as Harold sat reading by the fireplace, He heard Shadow's low growl vibrate from across the room. Harold looked up. Shadow was standing, rigid, staring out the front window. Heart pounding, Harold set his book down and moved to look outside. A dark SUV sat at the end of his driveway, headlights off, engine idling. Harold's throat went dry. Without thinking, he grabbed the old shotgun he kept behind the door, a relic from hunting trips long past, but still loaded and ready. Shadow stood beside him, tail low, muscles tense. Before Harold could open the door, his phone rang. It was Omar. "Harold, listen carefully." Omar's voice crackled. "We've got intel. That SUV at your driveway? 2 men inside, known cartel enforcers. They're here for the dog." Harold's grip on the shotgun tightened. "Omar, how fast can you get here?" 5 minutes. Stay inside. Don't engage unless you have to." But even as Omar spoke, the SUV doors opened. 2 large men stepped out, dressed in black, moving fast toward Harold's porch. Harold barely had time to think. He threw open the front door and fired a warning shot into the air. The blast echoed through the night like a cannon. The men froze, hesitated for a second, then ran back to the vehicle, peeling out of the driveway in a cloud of dust. Shadow barked furiously, lunging forward as if ready to tear them apart. Harold stood on the porch, heart racing, smoke curling from the barrel of the shotgun. Minutes later, Omar's cruiser arrived, lights flashing. His deputies jumped out, sweeping the area, but the SUV was long gone. Omar walked up the steps, looking Harold in the eye. "You okay?" Harold nodded slowly. "We're fine, thanks to this old shotgun and Shadow." Omar exhaled, placing a hand on Harold's shoulder. "That was too close. They're testing you, trying to see how far you'll go to protect him." Harold's eyes darkened. "Then let this be their answer." Over the next few days, Harold's house turned into something of a fortress. Omar stationed patrols nearby. Shadow never left Harold's side, following him from room to room, from the garden to the shed, always alert, always watching. And somewhere in the middle of that chaos, something beautiful started to grow. The bond between man and dog, once forged in fear and survival, now became something stronger. Every morning, Harold would wake to find Shadow already sitting by the door, waiting for their walk. Every night, Shadow would curl up at the foot of Harold's bed, refusing to sleep anywhere else. Neighbors started dropping off care packages, dog food, blankets, even new chew toys. Word of Harold's rescue had spread quietly around town, and people rallied behind him. But deep down, Harold knew the fight wasn't over. One evening, as he sat on the porch with Shadow by his side, watching the sun set behind the pine trees, Omar arrived with one final piece of news. "Good news and bad news," Omar said, lowering himself into a chair beside Harold. "The good news? Federal agents picked up the 2 men from the SUV outside a motel near the state line. They're in custody." Harold let out a slow breath. "And the bad?" Omar hesitated. "There's still a price on Shadow's head. Their boss won't stop just because 2-foot soldiers got caught. But I've arranged something. A relocation program for retired K9 units. It's hush-hush, off the books. If you want, both of you can disappear for good. New town, new names, safety." Harold looked down at Shadow, scratching gently behind his ears. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The only sound was the evening breeze rustling through the trees. Finally, Harold smiled, determination burning in his eyes. "I'm too old to start over, Omar, and this is Shadow's home now. If they want to come for him, they're gonna have to come through me first." Shadow let out a low, approving growl, as if saying exactly the same thing. And just like that, Harold and Shadow, his side by side. Two survivors, ready for whatever the world threw at them next. The following weeks felt like breathing after drowning. Shadow's health improved more than anyone expected. Dr. Perez, who had doubted if he'd even survive that first night, now watched in amazement as the German Shepherd trotted beside Harold on their daily walks. His gait was still stiff from healing ribs, but his eyes were alive, full of alertness and something else, trust. Every morning, Harold would fill his coffee cup and step out onto the porch, and without fail, Shadow would sit right beside him, scanning the property as if he'd appointed himself Harold's personal bodyguard. The town changed too. Neighbors Harold hadn't spoken to in years began waving as they passed. Some even stopped by with treats for Shadow. Kids from down the street asked if they could pet the hero dog. Even the mailman, who had once been terrified of big dogs, now kept a pocket full of dog biscuits. But despite the peace on the surface, Harold knew danger still lingered. One rainy afternoon, as Harold loaded groceries into his truck outside the general store, he noticed a black sedan parked across the street. Dark-tinted windows, engine running. His stomach tightened. Shadow, sitting in the passenger seat, immediately stiffened, his gaze locked onto the car like a laser. But before Harold could react, the sedan pulled away, disappearing down the street. Omar arrived at Harold's house later that evening. "You're still being watched," he said, holding a printout from a traffic cam showing the same car circling the area over the past 2 days. "They're patient, but we're not letting our guard down." Harold placed a firm hand on Shadow's back. "Let them come. We'll be ready." That night, Harold sat beside the fireplace, staring at the dancing flames, while Shadow lay curled at his feet. The house felt warm again, alive. Harold pulled out a photo album from the shelf, one filled with old black and white photos from his firefighting days. Images of him and his crew posing in front of fire engines, faces smudged with soot but smiling. He found one photo of himself holding a rescue dog from years ago, a Labrador named Duke. Harold smiled, running a finger over the faded image. "I guess life brought me full circle," he whispered, looking down at Shadow. The shepherd lifted his head, tail wagging softly. For the first time since Margaret passed, Harold felt like he wasn't just existing anymore. He had a purpose again. One morning, as Harold was fixing the fence at the back of the property, Shadow suddenly bolted toward the woods, barking like never before. Harold dropped his tools and ran after him, heart racing. Deep among the trees, Shadow stood growling, his body positioned protectively in front of a small figure crouched behind a bush. A boy, barely 10 years old, clothes torn, face smeared with dirt and tears. Harold's breath caught. The boy looked up, trembling. "Please, help me, they're coming." Without hesitation, Harold pulled the boy to his feet and rushed both him and Shadow back toward the house. Once inside, Harold called Omar immediately. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. As the officers arrived and surrounded Harold's property, Omar rushed inside, eyes wide when he saw the boy. "This is Jamal," Omar said after a quick phone call to dispatch. "He's been missing for 2 days. We've been searching the whole county for him." Harold knelt beside the boy, handing him a warm blanket and a glass of water. "It's okay now," Harold whispered, glancing at Shadow with pride. "You're safe." That day, Harold realized something powerful. Shadow wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was watching over the whole community. A week later, the local newspaper ran a front-page story. "Retired firefighter and rescue dog save missing boy." The headline didn't mention the cartel, the danger, or the late-night threats Harold had faced, but that was fine with him. The important thing was that Shadow had a second chance, and Harold had found something he never expected at his age. A partner, a friend, a reason to wake up every morning. Sitting on the porch that evening, Harold scratched behind Shadow's ears as the sun dipped low on the horizon. "You and me, boy," he said with a grin. "Looks like we've still got a lot of good left to do." Shadow rested his head on Harold's lap, letting out a contented sigh. And for the first time in a long, long while, Harold felt whole again. If this story touched your heart, remember, loyalty, courage, and love can show up when you least expect it. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video with someone who believes in second chances, for people and for dogs.